So I go out to brunch with Lauren on Sunday, and this is like the first time in quite a while that we've gone really anywhere on Sunday, and first time in probably 2 or 3 years we've gone to brunch. And we go out to brunch and we have a lovely breakfast. I had some Iggy breakfast tacos, and then 2 hours later, Joe Biden announces he's not going to be running again, and Kamala Harris steps in as the potential frontrunner for the Democrats. And I'm not saying that like me going out to brunch moved the needle from we're absolutely fucked to like maybe not we could be fucked, but I'm saying it probably played some role. I understand the butterfly effect. So I'm going to be going out to brunch every week and moving forward.
I think you should do that, and I think you should stick to your eggy tacos. That sounds really good. I do have to say, the last time I got eggy tacos for brunch was for one of my friend's birthdays, and it was like freshman year of college. And so I was, having brunch, eating egg tacos, and then it was at the edge of ASU campus. It was at Snooze or something off of
Mhm.
University. I'm not saying all Snooze is bad, but I'm just saying this was my experience with Snooze. I get up, I'm walking home, and I'm like, oh, something is not right. So I have to run to the first building that I see. I go in. I've had English in this building, so I know where I'm going. Go to the bathroom, clean up. I'm good. Step outside. I'm like, fresh new day. I just needed to get rid of that. Within 10 feet, I'm feeling the same thing I was feeling 20 minutes ago. I'm like, oh shit. So I literally had to stop at every single building until my
Oh
dorm.
my
And
god.
keep in mind, I was on the other side of campus from my dorm,
That you
the
were. That you
exact
were.
diagonal side. So I stopped at probably 10 to 15 buildings in order to make sure that I could make it home and not shit my pants.
Now, as much as I want to make jokes like, why do they call it snooze when they should be calling it rumble? Um, I instead want to end this anecdote with kind of the cherry on top. So, as of this recording, about a week and a half ago, Trump was nearly assassinated with a bullet in Pennsylvania. I don't know. And the Biden campaign apparently was scrambling to try to pull a bunch of campaign letters it had just sent out of the mail. And I didn't hear about why. I just heard that they were trying to do this. And I was like, okay, that's weird. I moved on with my life. I get back from brunch, and in my mailbox, this is Saturday's mail, I hadn't picked up yet. I pull out this Biden campaign letter. And this Biden campaign letter, which would have come out like 4 days potentially after Trump could have been assassinated, said, Joel, let's finish the job.
Oh my god, that's perfection. Oh my god. Wow. Brava.
Welcome back to Why Will No One Date These Guys? It's because we have upset tummies all the time. There is never a time in which we have normal, undisturbed tummies.
I
I'm
have an
Joel
upset
Guy.
tummy right now.
Oh
I'm
my
Naomi
god.
Guy. Welcome to Why Will No One Date These Guys? We talk about sex, dating, relationships, media surrounding all three of those topics. We interview legislators sometimes. We talk about policy. We discuss a variety of things. But
We make
first
fun
and
of Steve
foremost,
Harvey.
exactly. Every single episode, we like to have a new drink. We like to try it. Joel is most often trying that drink. Naomi suffers from upset tummy syndrome where she has to drink specific things or her tummy gets upset. So, Joel, hit me with a new drink.
Well, I'm wondering now, Naomi, if we just need every episode you to be trying like a new flavor of club soda or like ginger ale or something. That could be thematic.
That's literally what I do though. Like every single
Oh my
time I have a
god.
different type of sparkling water.
Incredible. I am drinking effectively sparkling water. It's a Poppy brand root beer. It's their prebiotic soda. I never can remember what a prebiotic is compared to a probiotic. But unlike normal soda, Naomi, this stuff contains 3% juice. I don't know what juice because I don't think root beer traditionally has juice in it, but what the heck. I'm a fan of root beer. but I'm like very particular about my root beers. I don't want
Yeah.
it to be like too sweet. I don't want it to be too subtle. I want like the herbal essences to come through. So like
Yeah.
if it can't deliver on that, I'm gonna be once again sorely disappointed in Poppy.
Damn.
Oh, that's very bad.
I tried Olipop's root beer. I think the last time I had it was literally today. I had some of Len's, like a sip of Len's root beer, and it tasted like a flat root beer. Like it tasted like a root beer that had been sitting out for like 2 days. How's the Poppy?
uh Very similar, very little
Okay.
carbonation. The sweetness, typically I'm expecting like stevia in these, and it wasn't stevia. It's almost like aspartame, which I don't think they use, but it's just a baffling flavor. No, it says it uses stevia. Fascinating. It's kind of sickly sweet, but also like not quite sweet enough. And it doesn't even have any herbal essence flavor. It's like at a restaurant, you mix soda syrup with carbonated water and it shoots out of the soda fountain, and that's, what fills your drink cup. And it's like the ratio was off of the soda syrup. Like they only put in like a third of the syrup they should have. And so it's like horribly watered down Coca Cola, but also like with a hint of cough syrup to it. It is kind of offensive. I may sip on it throughout the episode, but that's just because I have a sore throat. Do not consider that an endorsement. If you're gonna sell a soda for $2.50, it should at least taste okay. That's kind of my thinking.
That's so true. Well, today we are talking about part two of our kink discussion. Today we'll be talking about the history of kink, some fun people in history that, had a little kinkiness to them, and so on and so forth. In the last episode, we discussed a lot of different things. For instance, what kink is, how to go about having those conversations with your partner, consent, and then talking about the basic psychology of where kink originates from. So, to start off this episode, I'm going to talk about the history of kink, and I'm taking this from 10 parts in the history of kinky sex from listverse.com, and this article is by Joe Duncan. So, 10, this is a list. So 10 is kink and prehistory. Kink and sex has a long, rich tradition. In fact, sexuality is so deeply ingrained in the human experience that some of our earliest art was sexual organs and the sex act. In caves that may have been inhabited as early as 3,700 years ago, depictions of the human vagina were found etched into the rock. Although some animal pictures are mixed in, the site of a southeastern France mainly contains explicit depictions of the human vulva. Cave art with a sex theme has also taught us a lot about history, especially about the Americas and their people. Recent discoveries of cave paintings in Brazil show that people may have crossed over and inhabited the Americas as early as 30,000 years ago. 18,000 sorry. Wow. Words and numbers are not coming to me right now. Inhabited the Americas as early as 30,000 years ago, 18,000 years earlier than previously believed. What was the content of some cave paintings that taught us this? Sex, of course. Number 9 is ancient spanking. Not only do ancient cave paintings show explicit pictures of female genitalia, but ancient artists also tell a story that's familiar in the bedrooms and fantasies of some modern people, the story of spanking. One painting is fairly explicit. It depicts a woman being spanked by her lover in an ancient threesome. Both men have their hands raised. One has a stick prepared to spank her behind as she pleasures both men. The painting is fairly worn down, but the scene is still explicit, and it's obvious that the artist was trying to portray some kinky stuff from thousands of years ago. We often like to think that these activities are something new, as perverse symptoms of immoral times. But human sexuality has been around since the dawn of time, and mammalian and primate sexuality has been with us even longer. Number 8 is the ancient Egyptian kink. Yes, Joel.
I don't know. I'm thinking about this, and I know like in recent years, there's been a lot of speculation that early interpretation of cave paintings and like Neanderthal art may have been inaccurate, kind of skewed by like male anthropologists' ideas of what early humans thought. And when you start bringing in women anthropologists, they have differing perspectives, such as some art that some consider to be like fertility icons being instead like a woman's depiction of herself, feeling her body and depicting herself in clay without easy access to mirrors. I mean, look, none of us were around. This is speculation. Some of it's going to be better argued than others, but I think it's important to always keep that in mind. Yeah, I think it's interesting that like this article is portraying the mere display of genitalia as like inherently kinky. And I understand that like in our culture that's often true, but I think like early humans, and you can kind of trace this to like early religions too, had an obsession with women, not for like necessarily sexual reasons, but for the fact that women were kind of magical. And what I mean by that is there was like very close connections between women being seen as magical entities and having some kind of like godlike power because they could reproduce, right? That's a crazy, crazy thing if you think about it. Like distancing yourself from like the normalcy that is like being a human. Like the idea that one entity can create other entities and the other one, people with male genitalia can't, is kind of mind boggling. And so like, yeah, a lot of early people before they had like formal systems of science and writing and communication treated women as like special and having like divine powers. And I kind of wonder if like depictions of women's genitalia was not necessarily meant to arouse, but rather as kind of like, I don't know, for lack of a better term, like cathedral, like divine art, right? Depictions of like things they considered important, or writing down, drawing depictions of genitalia in the hopes that it would like enhance the fertility of like their families and their tribes and whatnot. I'm just aimlessly speculating, but yeah, I find it interesting that this author's first thought is like this is inherently like a sexual thing, because like I feel I'm not gonna go say okay, early humans had absolutely no sexual interest. Obviously they did. That's why there are now humans in the present. But simultaneously, I'm like, okay, you're starving constantly. You don't always have consistent accesses to water and food. A lot of members of your tribe are constantly dying, either from wild animals or from like disease or from just the temperature being too goddamn cold. I kind of wonder, like, the bigger thing you're focusing on is probably survival the majority of the year than it is like, let's get down to Bone Town. And I'm not saying like the two are like mutually exclusive. I just feel the more common thing that they would be like talking about and like engaging with was like trying to enhance their odds against like a cruel world that didn't want them to survive. Not, oh man, have you seen women's sex organs? They're pretty cool, am I right?
No, I think that's a really good point. And something that I've been mulling over recently has been like this idea that women can bring like you said, life into the world. Like that's a crazy idea when you step back from it and think like this is not normal. Like it is normal, but like it's crazy, you know what I mean? And thinking about it, like when did we get gaslit into thinking as women, when did we get gaslit into thinking that we weren't special? Like that's crazy. We could literally bring life into the universe and everyone's like, nah, she's just a woman, you know? Like that's insane.
Yeah.
Anyways, moving
Yeah, I
into
I
okay.
yeah, I just want to kind of put a pin on this, or pin on this, cherry on this. I want to underline this point. Um I think it's fascinating too that like what we consider kinky kind of evolves over time. And we sort of discussed this in the first episode, but it's fascinating that a lot of things that were considered perverse and weird, 100 years ago, are considered relatively normal today. Like a good example would be like anal sex, something that was considered like very taboo back in the past is now like, I wouldn't say commonplace, but it's common enough that a significant chunk of the population has tried it. Or gay marriage. Even we talked a little bit about like sodomy and the idea of like two men or two women having sex, and this was seen just as perverse as like having sex with animals, right? And so this idea that society has become like much more accepting of it is just fascinating. So I think kink stands apart in the modern era, but it's almost like an IQ test where like the baseline of normalcy of kink shifts over time. Right? The population is getting smarter every year, so they have to constantly adjust IQ tests to, make them slightly more difficult and keep the average at 100. And similarly, I think, what's considered kinky is constantly moving. And, maybe it's going to move backwards at some point. Maybe it's going to move, far forwards. But we should, always look back on the past and be like, this is interesting that, something that was considered so taboo in the past, like, I don't know, women's ankles, is now considered, like a normal part of life for us. Back to your listicle.
Okay. 8. Ancient Egyptian kink. Ancient Egypt was rife with prehistoric sex practices. As can be imagined by looking at their art and religious practices, ancient Egyptians commonly engaged in zoophilia, aka bestiality. Men had sex with cattle and many other domesticated animals. In fact, ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs depict bestiality as early as 3000 BC. While technically Greek and of Macedonian origin, Cleopatra was the ruler of ancient Egypt from 51 BC until her death in 30 BC. She's noticeably notable for her relationship with Julius Caesar, but one thing known by few people is that she had a very unorthodox sex toy, a vibrator filled with and powered by live bees. Cleopatra was definitely on the kinky side, and this invention was a hallmark of ancient ingenuity. The concept is simple. She had a phallic shaped object hollowed out and filled with live bees, which would then stir about angrily and cause the object to vibrate and bounce around. In a time before mechanics and motors, human inventiveness and dirty desire found a way.
I'm going to push back against this. Listicles, am I right? Um, I don't think this is accurate. I've done some research on this one before because I come across this in some other thing we were reading, and I just found a Reddit post about this on r Ask Historians. Unfortunately, the person that gave the response has deleted their account, but it looks like the information is sound. It says all references to the story that mention a source, and they are few, wind back via one route or another to Brenda Love's 1992 book, The Encyclopedia of Unusual Sex Practices, in a section on entomophilia. It says there that Cleopatra is said to have a small box that could be filled with bees and placed against her genitals for a stimulation similar to that of vibrators. There are no ancient sources that touch on this claim remotely similar to this. If there are any archaeological finds that could be misconstrued in this way, I've not found any evidence. Love cites no sources that allow the story to be traced back further. She mentions Havelock Ellis a few sentences later, but that's in connection with something else. The above line seems to be the original source for the story. It is so completely unconnected to anything actually tested ancient sources, I'm not optimistic about her motives. Now, I say this not to undercut you, Naomi, but I think this is an interesting point here where often ideas of kinkiness are used and weaponized as a way of discrediting powerful people. And this is true for both men and women, though I would argue that like women often bear the brunt of this. There are so many stories about like ancient Roman emperors, who were pedophiles or like had sex with horses or whatever, right? Like it's a way of like pointing to your political opponents and saying this person is perverse, he doesn't meet like normal socially acceptable standards. Heck, even the gods might be mad at him for like how he's treated, the world around him with impunity. And I think, for Cleopatra, this might have been, if it was indeed, real, a way for her enemies to, say, oh, look at this deviant over here not having sex the same way as us commoners. I don't know. Like, I feel that there's like other easier ways of like creating sex toys in the ancient world. Like, I was an inventor back then. I don't know what resources they had, but like, even just having someone like, I don't know, apply like a big ostrich feather to your genitals seems like a better thing than somehow making a box out of bees. I can't imagine that bee vibrations have that much force to them. It just seems baffling to me. But yeah, like again, I think this underlines the idea that like kink changes over time. This idea that like the Egyptians were potentially fine with bestiality is fascinating to me. I guess I shouldn't say that like kink only gets like we only get more and more kinky over time. It's what's acceptable changes, and so you might have Venn diagrams of acceptability that transition in and out of one another as time goes on, with certain things moving from one side to another, and there being potentially some overlap throughout human history.
No, I think that's a really good point. I think that there's a lot of reasons why we stopped thinking that bestiality was a good idea. And I think that's with the invention of, well, not the invention, uh, the um, the growing awareness of consent being very much needed in sexual
Also, cheap bite.
situations. They do?
I did look this up because I remember the Kinsey, the initial Kinsey tests revealed a prevalence of bestiality among the American population. So keep in mind when Kinsey first did his Kinsey assessment of like sexuality in America, he was interviewing thousands of people from across the country, many of whom grew up on farms. And based upon his assessments, he estimated that something like 8 million Americans at the time had engaged in some act of bestiality.
Wow. Wow. Okay. Take that back, but still. Take ooh. Okay, number 7, ancient necrophilia. Really getting into the weird shit. In keeping with their death worship, ancient Egyptians frequently practiced necrophilia, sex with the dead. From religious obsession with the afterlife to admirable embalming practices and massive pyramid graves, ancient Egyptians were fascinated with death. While discussing the best ancient Egyptian embalming practices, an ancient Greek author writes, the wives of men of rank are not given to be embalmed immediately after death, nor indeed any of them more beautiful and valued women. It is not till they have been dead 3 or 4 days that they are carried to the embalmers. This is done to prevent indignities from being offered them. In other words, let the body lie a few days so that the putrefaction sets in. That way, an embalmer can't have sex with your dead friend or relative. Even ancient Egyptian mythology is filled with necrophilia. For example, Osiris and Seth were enemies. Seth destroyed Osiris and cut him up. The goddess Isis was charged with collecting the dead body parts. Although the only body part that came up lacking when she tried to put Osiris back together was his penis. So Isis created a new penis and attached it to the body of Osiris, who was now pieced back together. Then she could have sex with the recreated corpse. This myth permeated the sexually liberal culture of ancient Egypt, where virginity was also almost unheard of and unmentioned. Group sex in Greece is number 6. Group sex wasn't limited to ancient paintings of threesomes. Greece was world renowned for its debauchery and still lives in infamy over its rampant homosexuality. One thing that stands out is the patently Greco-Roman as patently Greco-Roman is the obscene and extreme acts of group sex which were common throughout those ancient cultures.
I'm sorry, back up a second. This phrasing is getting interesting. I can't tell if the author is being sarcastic, but it almost sounds like Mike Pence wrote this article. He's like, obscene orgies of the ancient Greece. We already know they were perverted homosexual deviants, but did you know they also had threesomes?
I think it's trying to like make like, the not a point, but like trying to make it a little bit more dramatic. There is a picture of a vase that is portraying multiple men having sex together, or at least multiple men whose penises are hard that are trying to have sex.
Wait, that vase is in my house. How'd they get in there? How'd they see that? Send me that article, Naomi. I need to have some words with Mr. Pence.
So, a large part of ancient Greeks becoming a cornerstone of Western civilization was their olive oil, a treasure throughout the entire known world at the time. Thus, the olive oil could be transported in any old container. Taking great pride in their olive oil pots, the Greeks assigned their greatest artists to painstakingly inscribe various types of art on those pots. One of the most common themes was group sex. 5. Cake and sodomy with Caligula. Caligula. Wow, I haven't said that in a long time. When it comes to exotic sex, nobody did it like Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, aka Caligula. As the emperor of ancient Rome from AD 37 to 41, Caligula used his power in the most provocative ways to exploit people. Narcissistic, antisocial, violent, bloodthirsty, and hypersexual Caligula did what he wanted, and his abuses of power were seemingly never ending. He effectively discarded the Roman Senate so that they could not obstruct him. Caligula even forced senators to serve him an ancient Roman version of the miniskirt to embarrass them in front of good company. Cut to 1932. Italy is frantically searching for boats called the Nemi ships, which belonged to the ancient Roman emperor. Then, dictator Mussolini is trying to drum up Italian nationalism for the war effort and the newly employed Italian fascism. He thinks these boats are of great historical relevance. Why, you may ask? Because they represent ancient Italian power. The Nemi ships were Caligula's party boats. Picture two boats reserved specifically for wine-fueled candlelit orgies on the Mediterranean Sea. Each vessel is 120 meters, or 400 feet long, with marble decor, handmade mosaic tile floors, and a capacity for up to 2,000 people. In total, a 4,000-person orgy. Whether slaves or soldiers, Caligula had sex with whoever he wanted in any way that he wanted. When it came to group sex, the Greeks couldn't hold a candle to Caligula. Reportedly, he also enjoyed incest and murdering people during sex for fun. 4. Medieval prostitution. Contrary to popular belief, sex wasn't the prudish, shunned thing in the Middle Ages that we tend to think it was. Sex was common, natural, and somewhat free, when done for the right reasons and phrased in the right ways in discussion. In medieval times, it was believed that sex was necessary and that abstinence could lead to severe sickness. Women served as a religious sacrifice, and many devout Christians of the Middle Ages firmly believed that prostitution was good for religious men. Supposedly, men who did not release their sexual urges would go on to commit more vulgar and evil sins. If a woman was seen as impure, she would simply be a prostitute, which was rampant in the Middle Ages. To keep away from supposedly chaste women, men slept with prostitutes. Brothels were even set up so that the good woman could remain pure. In many places at that time, the church considered prostitution a necessary evil to keep men away from extreme violence. This is also why prostitution was actually a booming business at a time of seemingly rigorous chastity. 3. Marquis de Sade. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. Marquis de Sade was a French writer who was heavily interested in sex and eroticism. He was most famous for the work called Justine in 1791's version of 50 Shades of Grey. The term sadism, which refers to the sexual gratification from inflicting pain on another person, comes from Sade. He wrote the 120 Days of Sodom, the Kama Sutra for kinky people, and described the variety of sexual perversions. In the 100 Days of Sodom is about 4 wealthy men who kidnap other people at their leisure for sexual indulgence. Donatien Alphonse Francois, otherwise known as Marquis de Sade, not only wrote about these sexual perversions of rape, abuse, torture, orgies, he actually practiced them. He eventually died in a mental asylum in 1814 after being stripped of his freedom by Napoleon. De Sade's works were completely banned in France by 1957. 2. The rise of BDSM, modern BDSM. Like we mentioned before in the first episode, BDSM stands for bondage and discipline, and sadism and masochism. BDSM borrows heavily from the thought processes and eroticism found in the writings of Marquis de Sade. The themes are generally control, worship, pain, consensual abuse, punishment, submission, role-playing, rope, and other forms of bondage, handcuffs, spanking, and other gamut of other perversions that mainly relate to one party being dominant over the other. Pain delivered and or received for sexual gratification is one of the cornerstones of BDSM. While BDSM is as old as culture itself, the modern version is practiced throughout the West by participants from almost every walk of life. It is as commonplace as an orgy in ancient Rome. BDSM comes from smaller terms, BD and SM, which became popular in the 1960s in the United States. These abbreviations were often found in classified ads for sex and dating. However, it wasn't until the internet came along with BD and SM were married as one unit to form the subgroup and lifestyle we know today as BDSM. Many people identify with this part of their personality. Their roles are part of their lives, and they refer to BDSM as a lifestyle. Around 2000, BDSM became a broad term that covers all sorts of play fetishes, including things that don't relate to BD, B and D, or S and M, which like leather or latex fetishes, bubble popping, and more. 1. Pornography. Although it has been contested, some estimates say that porn is a larger industry than the American NFL, NBA, and MLB combined. Other calculations say that porn has a higher annual income than Google, Apple, Microsoft, Yahoo, and Amazon combined. This is a lot of smut and kink. I don't know when this was written because
this article come out in like 1990.
It has to. Speaking of kink,
Yahoo, you know that big company, Yahoo.
Let's see when this was written. 2018.
What the heck?
Yeah.
Was this like early AI? Did you know there were bees in the bonnet of Cleopatra? Naughty, naughty.
Speaking of kink, it is often jokingly said that if you can imagine it, there's a porn about it. That's not far from the truth. The American DSM-5 Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition, lists paraphilia, kinks, and a brief glance at the Wikipedia page for paraphilias will pull up slightly fewer than 100 different kinks. The world is full of quirks. For example, trollism, also called cuckoldry is when a man likes to watch his partner have sex with other men, often without the other party's knowledge. Then there are things that you almost never hear about, like telephone whoa, scatologia, which is sexual pleasure derived from obscene phone calls or even foul language over the phone. Not only are people out there doing kinks, there's video evidence of it. While definitive number of sexual kinks is hard to tie down, many estimate that say at least 500 paraphilias exist. It seems that they always have, but they're at our fingertips in today's digital world because of instead of being practiced in basements or in lavish Roman ships. The DSM-5 does note that paraphilias are not mental illnesses. So whatever your flavor of kink, rest assured that someone out there probably has done it tens of thousands of years before you were born.
I don't like this article.
I don't like it either. I'm going to move on to Greek contribution of
Wait,
kink
back
definition.
up a sec.
Yeah.
Um, so I feel this article is a better representation of how like a lot of people view kink as like weird and perverse. And this author is just like, oh, I need to find all these examples throughout history of people who are weird and different, and I'll string them together, and I'll make $10 on Listicle. Um, yeah, I don't know. Like none of this beyond maybe the ancient Egyptian practices or it seems that weird and gross. Maybe I'm just desensitized to all of this. Yeah, it really feels like it's making a mountain out of a molehill. But I guess one thing that bothers me too is it feels that they did very, very little research. Because if you do like any amount of Googling on certain historical figures, you find that they were up to some weird, kinky stuff. So, like, Napoleon, for instance, did not like his wife washing downstairs and would, like, tell her, like, I'm coming back from the campaign. Don't wash for 3 days, right? And, that was something Napoleon was into. James Joyce, famous writer James Joyce, was a big fan of his wife farting. And I'm not going to read these because that audio could be clipped and used against me at a future date. But if you type in James Joyce wife farting, you will find some of the, and I mean this seriously as someone who has been on the internet for many, many years, some of the grossest, some of the filthiest, raunchiest writing imaginable. You're pairing together a man who was like a master wordsmith with a guy who also really liked his wife farting. And the eloquence gets him into some weird places. Um, but yeah, like I don't know. This article feels very poorly researched. Some of it seems like very weird to me. I think this is a better representation just overall about how like the average person is like, well, my sexual interests are normal, but everyone else's are weird and gross. And I think that's a bad mentality. I think, the way it wrapped up was good, where it's like, look, there are a lot of paraphilias, and that's not a mental disorder. It's just like your respective interests, and that's cool. But yeah, just the tone felt a little off. One thing that I
No,
have to wonder, Naomi, is how often new paraphilias are invented. And what I mean by that is like you could not have like a fetish for like 3D anime girls or 2D anime girls until you had two-dimensional depictions of anime girls. You can't be into latex and wearing latex until the material latex exists. And that's only been around for like 100 years, right? It's difficult to imagine financial domination in a world before currency. I can imagine you could sort of see how like something like being a furry could translate, where like I like the idea of being an animal, and maybe you'd wear like a lion's head on your face or something, and like actual furs. But yeah, like it seems to me that as technology advances and like the world becomes more connected, we're only going to see more and more hyper specific fetishes. I don't think we should be surprised when like new technology allows people to express themselves sexually in new ways.
No, I completely agree. I think that this article was not the best, and I think like you mentioned, like the everybody's weird except me perspective, I think definitely applies to this one.
I'll say this, Naomi. This article came out in 2018, which was 2 years into the Trump administration. And I'm just going to say this. If we reelect Donald Trump, this is the sort of high quality journalism we're going to be getting. I think this is a
Yeah.
really good reason to not reelect Donald Trump. That's the only
Ooh.
reason I can think of off the top of my head.
Shamelessly plug anybody but him. Love it. Let's discuss Greek contributions to kink. The This is from the Fantasy Match app, which has a blog about sexy things. The Greeks weren't the first kinksters, like we mentioned before, but they were the first ones whose kink was preserved in detail in ancient literature. The Greeks take us back to the 3rd century BC, this period when ties, uh, probably better known as hetera, lived. The unique culture of heteras would have fit right in these days as well. Sapiosexuals preferred the company of, okay, how do you say this word? Heteras? Heteras?
I don't think I've heard that word before.
Okay, I'm just gonna keep saying it. Yeah, sapiosexuals preferred the company of heteras because they desired not just a lover but also an educated woman with a well-developed emotional intellect could play the part of Scheherazade, enveloping sex in an atmosphere of stories and myths. In the same century, Aristotle's History of Animals asserted that a woman could receive pleasure from sex the same way a man does. This might be the very first recorded statement of a woman's right to develop her own sexuality and embrace her kinkiness on par with men. The History of Animals made Aristotle an authority in future generations of sexual education. Later in the 17th century, anonymously published Aristotle's masterpiece appeared. Over the next few centuries, the book became all but the only source of sexual education in England that curious kinksters could use as an encyclopedia of theoretical knowledge about the body. The Kama Sutra's kinky games. One of the earliest literary sources describing sexual practices, the Kama Sutra, was written sometime between the 1st and the 6th century AD. Along with wide varieties of kinky games, the treatise also contain a description of scene playing kink called the love game. The hallmark of this kink is that all the actions of a man or woman are dedicated to the partner's arousal. Some self-adornment and body painting to nail and teeth coloring and more. The Kama Sutra's love game started the instant either player takes the first step toward creating an image to fit his or her own taste or a partner's kinky preferences. In addition to mentioning one of the BDSM's practice elements, bondage, the Kama Sutra describes the rules of partners' conduct within the framework of threesome relationships. 9 whole chapters are dedicated to the description of love adepts, heteras. Meanwhile, another 6 chapters of this love Bible deal with the culture of allure and captivation, as well as couples recovering their desires. That's the most popular problem that the 21st century clients bring to their sex therapists. If you get a charge of genital piercings, you might be pleased to learn that genital piercings was mentioned in the Kama Sutra for the first time. The treatise lauds penis ballinus piercings as a source of new excitement for both partners. So someone can choose to get an intimate piercing today isn't actually jumping on a new bandwagon or copy pasting trendsetters. They're touching on an ancient tradition and reproducing a 2,000-year-old ritual.
So if I can cut in here, I have a
Yes.
question for you, Naomi.
Go ahead.
Have you ever read the Kama Sutra?
I have not, but I recently just found out that apparently a woman's supposed to come like 2 or 3 times, like ejaculate or finish 2 or 3 times before penetration even occurs of the penis if you're having a heterosexual sexual situation.
So as a teen, I was very interested in the Kama Sutra, and I picked up a copy, I don't know, either at the library or when I was volunteering at a bookstore or something, somewhere in there. It is so boring. Like this article kind of touches upon like the content within it, but it is not at all like erotic. It is like the art of war for sex. It is this like meticulous field guide, like an anthropologist would write, outlining how like the people who wrote it thought sex should work and like what healthy sexual relationships were. But it is so dry. And I don't know if that's like because it's translated poorly, and if you were to read it in the original, language, it would be a little more like sensual, but my god, it is just the most boring thing. I put it down after a couple of pages. Let me give you an example, because I think this illustrates well like the sort of thing that like the Kama Sutra goes over. So the one thing that stuck with me is that men and women are divided into three categories apiece. Men are divided into three classes: the hare man, as in rabbit man, the bull man, and the horse man, according to the size of his lingam. I'll give you three guesses what a lingam is.
Is it a penis?
Oh my god, Naomi, you don't even need to read it in the original language. Women are also, according to the depth of her yoni, either a female deer, a mare, or a female elephant. There are thus three equal unions between persons of corresponding dimensions, and there are six unequal unions where the dimensions do not correspond, or nine at all, as in the following table shows. Equal are men and women, men being the hare, women being the deer, men being the bull, women being the mare, men being the horse, women being the elephant. Now there are also unequal relationships, where men are the hare, women are the mare, men are the hare, women are the elephant, men are the bull, women are the deer, men are the bull, women are the elephant, men are the horse, women are the deer, women are the horse, women are the mare. In these unequal unions, when the male exceeds the female in point of size, his union with the woman who is immediately next to him in size is called high union, and it is of two kinds. While his union with the woman most remote from his size is called the highest union, and is of one kind only. On the other hand, when the female exceeds the male in point of size, her union with a man immediately next to her in size is called low union, and is of two kinds, while her union with a man most remote from her in size is called the lowest union, and is of only one kind only. In other words, the horse and the mare, the bull and the deer form the high union, while the horse and the deer form the highest union. On the female side, the elephant and the bull, the mare and the hare form low unions, while the elephant has and the hare makes the lowest unions. There are then 9 kinds of union according to the dimensions. Amongst all of these, equal unions are the best. Those of a superlative degree, the highest and the lowest, are the worst, and the rest are middling, and with them the high are better than the low. That is a really good example, and it just goes on and on like that, classifying people into these like different archetypes. It's not even like INTJ testing. It's like literally show us your dick and we'll tell you like whether or not you have like an appropriate union with your partner. It's very weird. Like it separates people in terms of like the size of their genitalia, but then it also separates them in terms of how much carnal passion they have, and they like separate that as small, middling, and intense. And so it's important that like you pair together people with similar passions, which I can kind of understand. It's like, okay, if you've low passion, pair yourself with someone who's low passion. High passion, pair yourself with someone with high passion. But then I'm also like, well, I don't really think my sexual passion defines me as a person. And I think for a lot of people, it's like not something that defines them constantly. There are people out there definitely who think about sex 24/7, but I would say they're pretty much the exception, not the rule. And so this idea that you can classify all people and be like, well, you're pretty much asexual to, oh, you're pretty much hypersexual. And here's, whether or not your relationship's going to work out. It just feels like one of those personality tests that overgeneralizes. So yeah, Kama Sutra, if you're interested in it, find a copy online. It's open source. Flip through it. I don't think you're going to find much value in it. Average listener, I could be wrong. If you're interested in like smutty sex guides, what you're looking for is The Joy of Sex, first published in the 1970s. That is an illustrated guide to sexual intercourse, updated in 2008, and I believe that includes gay depictions. So, really, really ahead of the times.
Wow.
But yeah, like that is an actual book that like goes through and like attempts to classify like all sexual activity and like the pleasure you receive from it. And so if you're like the kind of pervert who gets off on education, that's the book for you.
Good to know. Okay. Moving into striptease, the most ancient kink, seductive dancing was another essential element of the Kama Sutra's love game and of Indian history in general. But Hindus weren't the only ones who practiced the kink of erotic dancing for seduction. Many Eastern countries are known for their schools of belly dancing, which were established during periods of when their societies encouraged positive attitudes towards sex. As for Europe, France was the birthplace of the public luring dance kink known as the striptease. The first dancer to undress for an audience did so in the Moulin Rouge Cabaret in 1893. Similarly, Can was originally a dance designed for seduction. Today, few people are enthusiastic about their kind of kink, but it is very popular at the end of the 19th century.
I'm confused because I thought like people in the Middle East and like Persia had long traditions of dancing girls who would like wear all sorts of like shimmery, gossamery fabrics and like unclothe themselves for people's gratification. I don't know where they're getting this idea that it was French cabaret that first invented the idea that people would take off their clothes while dancing. That seems a bit of a stretch.
That's not what they're saying. They're talking about how this is adapted from belly dancing and other things of that nature
No, what was the
into.
thing you said about cabaret?
Yeah, that's what I was saying. The first dancer to undress for an audience did so in Moulin Rouge Cabaret in 1893. Yeah, but
That's what I'm saying.
undressed. That's what I'm saying is I think it's the undressing. So you have the belly dancing, which they're already dressed in, like I'm assuming semi skimpy. I'm
Okay,
going off of
okay. I see
technicalities.
your point. Okay. But I mean, almost like I would argue, like, okay, sure, dance and sex, I see there's a connection between the two. But simultaneously, I'm like, you know, a lot of the time there were like displays of athleticism and like people's talents that might have been wrapped up in this too. You know, in the same way that there were all sorts of like ancient sports and games where men could show off like how physically fit and tough they were. I would imagine that some of this might have been women showing off their intense like core strength in like dance form and their ability to like stand on their toes. And there's a lot of dance forms that have evolved, like even in the modern day, and they're incredibly physically demanding. There's this type of Russian dancing where you're basically standing on your tiptoes the entire time, wandering around the stage in a dress, and it's really magical to see live because you're on your tiptoes and you have like a high degree of control over your movement. It almost looks like these women are floating across the stage. They're kind of just like soaring across the stage with their like very elaborate like dance moves. And so I don't know, like again, I wasn't back there. I can't draw these conclusions, but I think this is kind of our society once again trying to project sex in places where there's other reasonable hypotheses, and it's important to consider all of them when evaluating these historical eras. Professor Joel will push his glasses up on his nose and go, "That's all I had to say today, class." Chapter 6 and 7.
The corruption of the Renaissance. The Italian Renaissance is known for its Argentino poses or 16 pleasures, the work in which Raphael's apprentices proved that European kinksters have existed since the Renaissance. The engravings became the household name and were used in sex communication as part of a specific lexicon and even as a measure of sexual sophistication. Anyone whose knowledge of sexual poses surpassed those displayed in Argentino prints was a person with broad sexual experience. For some people in those days, the book served as a kind of manual, an introduction to varied sexual practices that went far beyond the missionary position, a kind of European Kama Sutra. The Argentino poses tempted the reader into repeating what they saw in the picture. The poses author has aced the kink of corruption, so to speak, not only for those who ordered the engravings, but for all the succeeding generations as well. Japanese bondage. Japan presented us with the gift of erotic bondage kink shibari, which is Japanese for decoratively tied. For a historic standpoint, the correct name of the art is kinbaku, which is relatively translated to the beauty of tight binding. Even the debates over the title's correctness capture their delicate aestheticism. One theory says that the word shibari emphasizes the usage of artistic aesthetic ropes, while kimbaku denotes the artistic, sensual, and sexual practice of binding in general. So, the historic roots of a vibrator. Sex toys have been turned to an extremely old kink. Archaeologists found 28,000-year-old dildo in the south of Germany. The automated dildo of our day was brought into vogue almost simultaneously by the French, the English, and the Americans. Frenchmen were the first to do it in 1737. 100 years later, the inventor in the USA and Great Britain created vibrators that originally had nothing to do with pleasure, but were not part of exciting games. The first vibrator were invented by doctors for a vastly different purpose than what they were used for today. They made them for their own benefit. After treating female patients' hysterias, many doctors suffered from aching wrists. Thus, they engineered a device to deal with hysteria better than a doctor's hands ever could: the vibrator.
I don't know enough about this period of history, but Hmm.
No,
They
they probably
didn't
just
know.
lobotomized these women.
I don't know, man. Like, I can only speculate, but I find it very odd that these doctors were not like, these women might be enjoying this. What a thing.
The last thing I want to talk about is kinky people in history. Joel's kind of touched on a few of these people. James Joyce, for instance. Let's talk about. I don't know. I'm gonna put that out there. I don't know how good this source is. So let me just put that out there first.
Is it better than B-Box?
I don't know. It also is mentioning Cleopatra. So let's talk about it. Was Cleopatra the queen of blowjobs? The rumor is that Julius Caesar nicknamed Cleopatra Golden Mouth because she was so good at giving blowjobs and allegedly had 100 men in one night. Imagine how sore her cheeks would be. Oh my god. The real story is that Goldenmouth was actually the name of a gossip from ancient Rome who wrote the histories of ancient Egypt, and a lot of historians at the time were very, very biased about successful female rulers. Somehow in history, we've conflated these two things, but the reality is that Cleopatra was a very sexual, autonomous woman. She was an incredibly good leader and she had a lot of partners, and it's one of those situations where women's sexual autonomy has changed against them.
Ask Historians speculates about this, and they're like, there's not really a lot of evidence. This feels more like a political attack against Cleopatra than anything else. But it might have been one that was like supported by Caesar, because other rumors about Caesar included the fact that he was gay, which we've alluded to on other episodes before. And so it might have been helpful for Caesar to spread that rumor, because it's like, look, I'm having sex with a human woman. Isn't that incredible? Come on, guys, give me some credit.
Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart
Ah, yes. Hmm.
writes multiple songs about farts and poo and licking people in the ass. Let's talk about the 6 kinkiest US presidents. This is obviously, I'm assuming what do you call that? Like an opinion piece? Yeah, it's an opinion piece by Jeremy
Mm-hmm.
Glass. Lyndon Johnson comes in at number one. Mr. Johnson, I think just his name, Mr. Johnson, is like a great way to describe him. Was the
President
successor
Johnson.
was the successor to the late JFK, and in becoming president decided to one up the guy in all of his famous womanizing ways. For starters, Lyndon took great pride in his penis, nicknaming it Jumbo, and often whipping it out in public. To add insult to injury, injury in this case being the sight of an old man's doing, he would ask people if they'd ever seen anything bigger than this. Lyndon's kinkiness came from his love of voyeurism, whereas he thoroughly enjoyed making himself and Jumbo a spectacle. Johnson was also a fan of making passes at women, usually in front of his wife, and would often remind the women he harassed that he was the president and had power to do so. With his love of his penis combined with his predatory ways, Lyndon Baines Johnson was obviously an old kinky motherfucker.
Well,
And
okay,
this
let me
is
add to this, because Johnson was known not just, I didn't know this bit about like him being a famous seducer, but he was
seducer
a
is a
power
strong
broker.
word.
He was like one of the last like democratic politicians who like understood that being president is a way of expressing power and like leveraging your authority in such a way to manipulate people into doing what you want. And so the thing that I heard about Johnson is he was constantly reasserting himself as like the most powerful commanding person in the room, and he would like invite people into the bathroom when he was like having a poop, and would like conduct meetings with like subordinates or with his like opponents, the Republicans. They would like invite them over to the White House and be like, hey, I'm doing number two, come in, talk with me. And it was like it might be voyeurism, sure, I think there's that, but it also is like an expression of power. It's like, I'm taking a dump and I literally do not give a shit about you. But the other
Literal
thing,
shit.
yeah, the other thing was, besides number two, he would also like be talking to people as he was like urinating and being like, see this thing? Ooh, I'm gonna smack you in the face if you get out of line. So yeah, like interesting combination of factors.
Coming in at number two, Calvin Coolidge.
Wait, I'm
Mr.
confused. What, I
Coolidge.
thought there were six on this list.
Yeah.
Didn't we just do
Lyndon B.
number
Johnson.
six?
No, I just said Lyndon B. Johnson
Oh,
was the
okay.
first kinkiest.
Okay, sorry. Okay.
Calvin Coolidge doesn't have a good cool name like Mr. Johnson or President Johnson. He's just President Coolidge. So, while on the quest for information on the sexual misdoings of former presidents, one name kept popping up in numerous places: Calvin Coolidge. And the fact that kept popping up alongside Coolidge's name that he loved having Vaseline rubbed on his head during breakfast. The truly remarkable thing is that there is zero information on why the 30th president enjoyed such a strange and kinky act. Why does it have to be kinky? It could just be that he just liked having like a moist scalp. After a long query of Google with safe search off, I dug a message board chock full of Vaseline lovers. After much debate, I realized that the kink involved from the act comes from a very power of the act itself. Imagine being in a position where you could, at any drop of a hat, have someone lube up your head without a choice. In the mid 1920s, that's about as kinky as a lifetime subscription to Brazzers. Coming in at number 3, John Tyler. John Tyler holds the record for being being the first man to become president upon the death of a former president, as well as the record for the most sexually active president in history. John Tyler did some serious work in the White House, and I'm not talking about the 1844 Treaty of Wangea. He
No,
fathered
of
15
course. Who would be talking about that?
He fathered 15 children with 2 different women in his 71 years on this planet. While most men are reaching their sexual peak anywhere from 18 to 22, John Tyler fathered his last child at the age of 70. I know people younger than that who have given up on masturbation. John Tyler had a lot on his plate while he was hoisted in the presidency, a country on the brink of war, the annexation of Texas. To keep all your thoughts and energy on sex means the man must have enjoyed it a hell of a lot. Either way, it paid off. Tyler still has living grandchildren to carry his name, and more importantly, his love of intercourse. Coming in at number 4, Warren Harding. Harding led a rather unconventional life in the White House. He would often play poker with his friends, chew tobacco, smoke cigarettes, and serve bootleg whiskey to his guests, all during Prohibition era, too. To further indulge his vices, Warren would also sneak off in the middle of the night to watch burlesque shows. Harding's kink comes from his firm grasp of his vices: tobacco, illegal booze, and naked ladies. What else could a man ask for? Oh, right, he also used to like to have sex with his mistress, Nan Britton, in the closet of the White House. Years after his death, 100 letters of romantic and erotic nature were uncovered between Harding and Britton. Ah, Harding, he could have sexted if he were alive today. Number 5, Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson, nicknamed Old Hickory, was the 19th century
Oh yeah, he
answer to
was.
Ron Swanson. He was tough as nails, old-fashioned, son of a bitch who loved himself a good fight to the death and spent the last years of his life with a bullet lodged next to his heart. Sure, he will always be remembered for his die-hard pro-slavery, anti-Indian ways, but it was also overlooked that he once invited prostitutes to the White House annual Christmas ball. Even though the
Sure, I can
invitation
excuse racism, but like prostitutes at the ball. Oh, you've gone too far, sir.
Even though the invitation of the notorious prostitutes were sent in jest, the ladies of the night responded seriously and were ridiculed upon their arrival. And number 6, Bill Clinton. The gray and imperial wizard of kink himself, Bill Clinton, shocked the nation with his illicit affair with the 22-year-old intern, Monica Lewinsky. Oh, just wait. Clinton reported having 9 sexual encounters with the former intern, though apparently none of them resulted in sexual intercourse. 9 times and no sex? Question mark. That kind of tomfoolery ends in your first year of high school. If you calculate that time spent on a blowjob is, on average, 20 minutes, which means Bill Clinton's penis was in Monica Lewinsky's mouth for at least 3 hours total. Bill Clinton's blowjob escapade was just the tip of the sexy iceberg, as more facts began to trickle out about their affair. The best and kinkiest story involved 2 rooms in the White House. The first room contained Yasser Arafat, and the second contained Bill and Monica in a state of undress. While Yasser awaited Bill's arrival, Monica reportedly masturbated with a cigar while Clinton watched and beat off alongside her. Gosh, the amount of rules broken in that scenario is mind-boggling, yet shockingly arousing. While Bill lied about the nature of the affair, you could tell the guy was pretty goddamn sure that he loved to get his Johnson waxed. I love the way this guy writes articles.
I hate how this guy writes articles. What's the opposite of a kink? Because I have that for this man writing about sexual activity. I am baffled because he seems to have excluded JFK. who's like the first person
Yeah.
I think of when I think of like womanizing president. Like JFK was known to have multiple mistresses, and it's been argued. I'm not going to speculate too much, but it was argued that he might be bisexual because he had some very close relationships with men in
Ooh.
his earlier life. But
Okay.
yeah, like that feels like a glaring omission. I'm fascinated by that. I mean, you could also argue Ronald Reagan. I know Ronald Reagan is seen as like this respectable conservative icon, but like he was known for sleeping around Hollywood before he, became a politician. Eh, yeah, I don't know. It's interesting how this author is trying to portray these people because like I wouldn't really associate any of these people outside of Clinton with like being kinky or like sexual deviants. And so it's fascinating that he's trying to make this mountain out of a molehill. Maybe it's just because like don't want to think of our presidents in this way, but I almost wonder if it's because like in the grand scheme of things, kink doesn't really define people, right? It's not something that you'll be remembered for. No one is like, oh, Cleopatra and her weird bee vibrator. They're like, she married Julius Caesar and she took over as Egypt and she was the wealthiest woman in the ancient world. And it's like, yeah, those are more interesting facts, I would argue. They create a more well-rounded picture.
Well, I wouldn't say that Clinton will be known for his kink, but he definitely will have a legacy of having sex in the White House with his
I mean,
intern.
I'm sure plenty of people have had sex in the White House, even with interns. It's just a matter of like it escalating to a higher point.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, yeah, Clinton's legacy is welfare program revitalization, not in a good way. It's NAFTA and shipping a bunch of US jobs overseas. It's all sorts of terrible foreign policy blunders. Yeah, unfortunately his legacy hasn't aged well. And I'm not here to be like, let's shit on politicians.
No, I
It's
think we
just more of
should.
like it's difficult to look back and point to more than a couple presidents. You're like, there's been a net positive done by you in this country. It's frustrating, especially at a time like this when I can't always be eating brunch on Sundays. I can't
Ugh.
always be righting the ship. I can't always be here to defend the freedoms of this country, Naomi.
Gosh dang it, Joel. Well, what we learned today. Um, the entire history of the world has been kinky. Let's start with that. We learned a lot about the different cultures' contributions to kink and the kinkiest president in history. So, I would like to finish this episode and say that kink is normal. What you're feeling is normal. Always ask for consent. And reminder that we have a great episode about having these difficult conversations with your partner if you're interested in something and you don't know how to bring it up, we recommend the book Sex Talks. I'm always forgetting the author's name, but we have
Vanessa
a
Marin.
Vanessa Marin. We have a great episode about it. If you don't want to listen to our episode, totally understand. But go listen, listen to the audiobook or get the book. It's honestly a really great resource. Um,
If I can cut in here,
yeah, go
a
ahead.
resource that we discussed when we were going through the book more is FetLife. And I will caveat this here. I have never used FetLife. I am unfamiliar with its interface. What I am aware of is that it's considered to be like the largest and best directory slash forums to meet up with like minded people interested in kink. I just went to their website. On their main page, they claim they currently have 11,250,000 members from all across the world. They've shared a collection of 87 million photos, and they have 22,000 scheduled upcoming events across the country. All sorts of meet and greet activities and orgies and dressing up as puppies and sitting
Hot.
in cages having a time, all sorts of things to indulge all sorts of fantasies and whims. And I say that because like often if you have like kinky desires, it can be difficult to see yourself having like a loving, affirming relationship with other people. I don't mean that to be like, oh, you're gross and weird. It's just like that's not something you bring up on dating apps. It's not something that you like discuss on the first, second, third, fourth, maybe even fifth date. And so it's a really good resource if this is like something, a part of you that you want to explore and you want to like bond with other humans over, to go check out and dip your toes in the water. We have heard, as I think we mentioned during the More episode, that there are some abusive people who use FetLife. but there are extensions that identify some of them you can install in your browser, and the community is very, very good at like trying to like identify those people and like prevent them from continuing with the group activities. So they're self-policing to a certain extent. They're good at like cracking down on people who take advantage of others who are interested in exploring their kinky selves. So yeah, if there's one takeaway we can give beyond that kink is normal and okay, it's that there are resources out there that will allow you to explore that side of yourself. There's probably events going on somewhere within your state to explore your specific fetish at some point in the future. And even if there isn't, you can schedule one. Put out some Ritz crackers and some salmon dip and a couple of light beers, and you're off to the races. You're ready for anything.
So true. So true. Well, we appreciate you listening. We would like to mention that we do have a Patreon, and all of our Patreon subscription money is going straight into Palestine relief as well as trans rights activism. We would appreciate if you could donate. We totally understand if you can't. So if you can't, we would also appreciate you leaving us a nice review, or on any of our streaming platforms. We're on Spotify, Apple Music, literally anywhere where you can find podcasts, we are there. So that would be very helpful to us. If you have any things you want us to talk about, shoot us an email. We will try to discuss it. We have limits, but very few, so let's be real. We appreciate you tuning in, and we hope you have a great week.
We have many thanks for the use of our theme music, which is the song Drop by Ketsa. You can find more of their music online at ketsa.uk. You can also find Date These Guys online on Twitter and Instagram at @DateTheseGuys, or visit datetheseguys.org. If you have questions for the podcast or want to be a wealthy sugar parent, please send an email to datetheseguys@gmail.com. If you'd like to support our work, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/datetheseguys. We have behind-the-scenes information, early episode access, participation in polls, and exclusive access to a guy sibling map of date ideas for the Arizona area. Since the world sucks right now, we are currently donating all Patreon proceeds to trans organizations like the Trevor Project, a trans suicide prevention organization, and moving assistance funds for those fleeing states outlawing their very existence. Please consider becoming a member and supporting our work today.